Hi, good morning, everyone. So, apologies for having bad internet, but as promised, I'll already gonna be recording the whole theory and conceptual lecture for PPE, so property, plant, and equipment, and intangible assets. So, the expectation would be you're gonna go through over this conceptual lecture in order for you to start answering your problem set, which will be due Wednesday night time. So, after class pa natin. So, I'll adjust the OVLE deadline. And then basically what we'll be doing for the last two sessions would be Wednesday, we'll have a quiz on receivables pa rin. Friday, we'll have a quiz on PPE and intangible assets. So with that said, let's now take a deep dive into property, plant, and equipment. So module 3, we're done with AR, notes receivable. Now we move on to property, plant, and equipment. And as usual, in terms of our overview, basically the first two things that we want to do would be identify ano nga ba yung mga long-term assets, right? And then specifically, what would be your PPE? And then from there, it's really just our straightforward accounting. So ano ba yung initial recognition? What is our subsequent recognition, meaning our methods for depreciation? And then finally, we'll go talk about disposal. And then let's round out our analysis with the financial statement. So we'll describe the financial statement presentation for property, plant, and equipment. So let's talk more about long-term assets. So when you really think about it, we've discussed cash, inventory, and receivables. And yun naman talaga, mostly current assets, right? Kasi mabilis sila i-turn, or parang there's in terms of like how you turn it into cash, mas mabilis sila. But now, in terms of long-term assets, you actually have these the following categories. So you have your property, plant, and equipment. So that would mean your land improvements, your building, and your equipment. You'll have your investment property. You'll have your intangible assets, which would be comprised of your patent, copyright, trademark, franchise, goodwill. And then you'll have your mineral resources. So, what will be our focus? Our focus will really gonna be talking about property, plant, and equipment, and intangible assets. Pero importante rin na you can differentiate between the four long-term assets. So in order for us to do that, kailangan alam natin yung overview or the definition of property, plant, and equipment. And really, based on PAS 16, property, plant, and equipment are what? They are tangible assets held for use in production and used for more than one period. So, ano yung mga important that you memorize? Or you really, what are the important special characteristics? T, tons, right? Tons. T, it should be a tangible asset. So it has a physical substance and it's a resource to the company. Number two, it's held for use in what? In the operation of the businesses. So in for production, supply for goods and services, or admin purposes. So O, it's for the operation of the business. And three, NS, so tons, not intended for sale. Right? So importante, when I ask you what are the specific characteristics of PPE, it's tons, tangible, held for use in the operations, and not intended for sale. Now, let's differentiate it with investment property, right? So may PPE ka, meron ka ring investment property. Ano ba yung investment property? On the other hand, investment property naman is used to earn rentals or for capital appreciation. So I don't know if you noticed, in terms of real estate in the Philippines, sobrang dami nag-i-invest in terms of buying condos, etc., etc. Now, how do you classify condos? If you use it for your operations, etc., etc., that would be under PPE. But most people, they hold parang their condominiums, etc., etc., so that meron silang pwedeng paupahan so that they can earn rent. Or some people, they'll buy a property and then say, oh, in 10 years, mag-appreciate yan. So capital appreciation. So what does that mean? Instead of being PPE, those would be considered as investment properties because the major purpose of buying those properties would be two things: HRCA. It's held for rentals, meaning ikaw yung owner, pinapalis mo. Or capital appreciation. You buy a property at 5 million, you expect that in 10 years, magiging 10 million siya. Right? So capital appreciation. Nag-appreciate yung asset. Not really for your operations of your business. So, let's now distinguish the two. Long-term assets are tangible assets, right? So it could be land, building, etc., etc. If it's used for operations, then that would be PPE, property, plant, and equipment. On the other hand, kung yung use mo is for HRCA, held for rent, or capital appreciation, investment property. So, nasa classification pa lang. Right? So, ang focus natin would be PPE, the one that is held for use in the operation of the business. So the next question is, how do you actually account for PPE? And as usual, we have our three phases. Our initial recognition, so we have to be an expert at classification. So that's the first type of problems that I need you to be experts at. Classification, right? Number two, we will have subsequent measurement. So kung for your notes receivable, interest yung kinakalculate nyo, or for AR, it's more about the bad debts. Sa PPE naman, it's depreciation. Okay? Depreciation. Then finally, we'll go through disposal. So ito yung checklist natin of the things that you need to know and master in terms of accounting. So, first things first, ang initial recognition ng PPE is gonna be at cost at the point of purchase. Again, initial recognition will be at the cost of the point of purchase. Kapag ilalagay mo na siya sa financial statement, kailangan the subsequent measurement should be net PPE. So similar to AR, net AR. So ano yung net ng PPE? It should be the PPE minus the accumulated depreciation minus accumulated impairment plus capital expenditures. So again, some unfamiliar terms, but ang more important or key takeaway for this slide is ano ba yung measurement sa initial and sa subsequent. So initially, you measure at cost. Subsequently, you measure at net PPE. So, with that said, let's have an example. Let's say, bumili ka ng phone. So, ano yung initial recognition natin for this one? If the cost of the phone is 60,000, then I will use it as my measurement. So, ang journal entry is debit equipment, 60,000, credit cash of 60,000. Tumaas yung equipment by the cost of the purchase, and then bumaba yung cash kasi nagbayad tayo. And then, as you may know, technology nowadays, meron kasi silang planned obsolescence. It's not gonna last you a lifetime. Babagal yung software, maapakan mo, mahuhulog mo sa stairs. So, after a while, madudumihan, hindi na ganun ka-brand new yung phone. And what will happen? What will happen is that the value of that equipment, do you think 60,000 pa rin? No. Meron siyang depreciation. Hindi na siya 60,000 now. And to account for that loss in value, we call that a depreciation. And as you have already learned, ang journal entry for depreciation would be debit depreciation expense, credit accumulated depreciation on how much yung nawalang value. So let's say 20,000. So now, magkano ko na i-value yung phone in my subsequent measurement? Well, my phone, in terms of like the subsequent measurement, will be now at 40,000. How did I compute that? It's equipment, 60,000, minus the accumulated depreciation of 20,000. So now, after one period, ang i-represent ko na is that my net PPE is at 40,000. So, just to show you, initial recognition, the cost is 60,000. Subsequent recognition, naging 40,000. So, ganun lang yung quick overview of pagdadaanan natin in terms of PPE. May initial recognition ka, how much did you buy it at cost? Subsequent measurement, kailangan magaling lang kayo mag-depreciate. And then finally, when you dispose, kailangan alam nyo lang yung mga carrying amount so that you can understand kung may gain or loss ba in the sale. So don't worry, iisa-isahin natin yan, right? So first, let's start with initial recognition. What makes it difficult? What makes it difficult usually is classifying your different types of your property, plant, and equipment, right? So, in terms of your property, plant, and equipment, there are different types. You have your land improvement, your buildings, and equipment. And now, I'll tell you, madugo siya in the sense that in terms of the theory, pag may binigay akong line item, the expectation is for you to be able to classify kung land improvement ba siya, building, or equipment. So, let's go in terms of the deep dive into each of the key definitions. First is land, right? So land is basically something that should be used for your operation. So, maybe it could be in terms of like a manufacturing plant or an office site, right? So ano yung mga things that you need to add in order to determine the true cost of your land? Well, ito na yung parang you have to be familiar, right? So definitely, purchase price, including stamp taxes, title guarantee insurance, option fees, kasama yan ng purchase price. That would be part of the value of the land. Settlement costs, so pag may nakita kayong escrow fees, titles fees for investigations, legal fees, kasama rin yan sa cost of land. Kapag bumili ka ng land, tapos may kausap kang real estate agent, may ibabayad kang commission, part of the thing that you include in the value of land. Other things, the last two would be accrued property tax and liens, so assumed by the purchasers. So pag may nakita kayong taxes in arrears, land mortgage, delinquent property tax, etc., etc. Tapos ikaw yung nagbayad as a purchaser, that should be included in the cost of your land. And finally, any necessary cost to make the land usable for the purpose of your operations include. So pag may nakita kayong grading, leveling, landfill, clearing of trees, clearing of trees, pag kinlear mo yung trees, part yun ng cost to make it into the operation of your land. Pero pag binenta mo, so let's say the cost of clearing the trees in my property would be around 100,000, and then I will sell yung wood. So 100,000, nakabenta ako ng 10,000 dun sa wood na binenta ko. So the cost is around 90,000, right? Land survey assessment. All of these things na minention ko, this long list, all the costs that you use to pay in order to acquire the land and to use it for its purpose should be what you value the land. Okay? Another important thing about land is that it does not depreciate. Okay? So it does not depreciate. So please be aware of ano ba yung mga costs that are associated to the land, and that you never depreciate land, right? So you never depreciate land. Next classification would be land improvement. So anong difference ng land versus land improvements? Well, land improvements naman are structural additions made on the land. So anything that is included in all the necessary costs to make the improvements for its intended use. So pag may nakita kayong driveway, car spaces, fences, landscaping, sewage system, sidewalks, pavements, underground sprinklers, all of those are land improvements. So let's take a look at an example. So ang goal natin for this example is, okay, you spent in total 2,763,000 to acquire the following. Ito yung breakdown. Out of the 2,763,000, how much yung land? How much yung land improvement? So, let's determine. 1.7 million raw is the cash price. So, binili mo yung land. 1.7. So, it should be under land. So, gawa lang kayo ng 2 columns. Next, may accrued taxes raw. That's part of the land. Meaning, yung previous owner, hindi siya nagbayad. Pero dahil to get the clean title, para wala kang utang sa gobyerno, you pay 140,000. So where would you classify that? That would be under land. Now, nagpakabit ka ng sewage system. Sewage system, is that part of land or land improvement? Well, it's a structural improvement, so that would be land improvement. 50,000, nagbayad ka dun sa real estate broker. So yon, more on the land. So aside from the sewage, nagpa-fence ka raw and nagpa-install ng light post. Is that land or land improvement? Well, dahil merong actual physical structures na in-include, that would be 120,000 under land improvement. Taxes in arrears on the property. Same. So, 15,000. Pavements, land improvement. Land survey. Sinurvey yung land para ma-assess mo kung okay. That should be, the 30,000 should be under land. Assessment. Where would that go? Under land. Landscaping. So, you think, oh, landscaping, land. But honestly, landscaping is more of parang naglagay ka ng fence, parang naglagay ka ng sewage, pampaganda. Or it's an improvement of land. So, landscaping would be land improvement. Clearing and grading, that's something that you used to do to make the land in terms of your intended purpose. So, land. Attorney's fees. To get, or ano ba yung mga legal fees mo? 86,000 in escrow. I saw that it's a settlement cost, so it's 14,000. So now you can see that yung 2.7 million na breakdown natin into land and land improvement. So the next step lang is after you classify, you just add. So you add 1.7, 140, 50. You will get 2,085,000 yung land, and yung land improvement would be the sum of these, which would be 678,000. So my land would be 2,085,000. My land improvement would be 678. So my journal entry, when I paid everything in cash, would be debit land of 2,885,000, debit land improvement for 678,000, credit cash of 2,763,000. So, at this point, if you have any questions, feel free to just comment on the video and then just let me know. So, we're done with land and land improvement. Let's now go to buildings. So, again, buildings should be used for operation. So, the building can either be binili mo na, nakatayo na siya, so you bought it, or tinayo mo. So, what are the costs? When you purchase, same with land, kailangan kasama yung purchase price, the settlement cost, the commission, the accrued property taxes, and the necessary costs to make it for its purpose. So, pag may nakita kayo, remodeling, replacing and repairing roof, floors, electrical wiring, and plumbing, all of those are attributed naman to your building costs, right? So that is pag pinurchase mo na, nakagawa na yung building. Pag tinayo mo, these are the things that will be included in your cost. So yung contract price, yung fees na binayad mo to the architect to design the plans and the specifications, yung payment mo to your building contractor, yung payment mo to the city to get a building permit, excavation is for building. Right? Ine-excavate mo na. Interest expense, so pag umutang ka and then you to finance the project, that's part of the building. A temporary building for your workers, a temporary quarters for your crew, you'd think, oh, baka land improvement. No. All of those are necessary costs in order for you to construct the building. So again, temporary building, temporary quarters, safety fence around the site and removal, lahat yon building cost. Inspection, pag in-expect na, check kung up to the standards, liability insurance, all of those things are part of the costs that we will attribute to the building. So, let's take a look at an example. Ngayon, land improvement building. You spent a total of 1.67 million. Out of that 1.67 million in cash that you spent, how much would go to land, how much would go to land improvement, and how much would go to building? First, architect fees. Well, obvious. architect fees would be building. Land survey. Okay, nakita na natin yan. Sinurvey mo yung land. So, land. Grading and filling. Grading and filling, land pa rin yun, right? To grade and fill the land. Pero pag hinukay mo na to make a building, that's called excavation. So, excavation, 200,000 should be building. Landscape, building permit. So, obviously, building. Landscaping, again, hindi siya land. Landscaping, think of like a very beautiful shrub. Right? Hindi naman siya necessary for the land, right? It's more of an improvement. So, landscaping is land improvement. Safety fence. Kanina, may fence tayong nilagay. Pero, safety fence around the site is really more for para makatayo ka ng building. So, that is rather than land improvement, should be building. Pavement. Pavement, obviously, land improvement. Yung temporary building so that may matirahan yung workers mo is building. Clearing of trees, more of the land. More of the land. Interest cost during construction sa building. Umutang ka to finance the construction, so the building. Insurance premium sa building pa rin. So now when you add all of it, you will now have the valuation that, okay, 145,000 yung land, 55,000 yung land improvement, and 1.47 million yung building. So my journal entry in my initial recognition for the purchase would be debit land of 145,000, debit land improvement of 55,000, and debit building of 1,470,000. So that you'll credit to 167,000 of cash. So again, kung napapansin nyo, pagalingan lang sa theory, paramihan lang ng familiarity. Pero ano yung crucial dito? Kapag nagkamali kayo ng isang classification, tapos ang tanong sa problem is 2 points each. What is the value of land? What is the value of land improvement and building? Pag nagkabaliktad lang kayo ng isa, mag-chain yung mistake. So please, don't underestimate itong theory portion na to. Ito yung usually nagpapataas ng points, right? So please know na kailangan yung strategy natin here is that super mastered yung classification. So, next would be equipment. So, we're done now with building. Last is equipment. So, equipment are machines used in operation. So, again, we include all necessary costs to bring the equipment for its intended use. So, cash purchase price, the sales tax, yung freight pag ikaw yung nagbayad to bring the equipment, insurance during the transit na ikaw rin yung nagbayad. All of these are capitalizable costs. Assembling, pinunturahan mo, niletter mo, in-install mo, tinest mo yung unit, dinesmantle mo at the current location, nirefurbish mo yung machine, nagkaroon ka ng safety rail and platform for the machine itself. May water device para hindi mag-overheat. Cost of adjustment, site preparation, and may consultant ka na para paano lang i-bring yung machine na yon into your intended use. All of these things, pag nakita nyo, capitalizable to equipment. Meaning, part siya ng equipment cost. On the other hand, pag may nakita kayong annual recurring expenditures, like kailangan mo raw annually yung motor vehicle registration, may insurance ka raw after installation, or may ordinary repairs, hindi mo siya i-fall under equipment. These are all outright expense. So bakit may X? We do not include it in the cost of the equipment. So let's take a look at an example. Para wag tayo malito, let's leave land improvement and building. Let's just talk about equipment. Out of the 799,500 na ginastos ko for the equipment, how much should I capitalize the equipment? How much should I outright expense? Yun lang naman yung tanong pag equipment. So let's begin. Purchase price obviously would be equipment. May sales tax ka na on top of the purchase price, we include it in the equipment. Okay, insurance. Pero it said during transit. So parang pinadala mo to the intended use, pero just to be sure may insurance ka para pag nabasag, safe. Dahil bringing it into the intended use, it's still part of equipment. Versus, yung next line item, annual insurance policy, annually mo naman yung binabayaran eh. So it should not be capitalizable. It should be outright expense. Motor vehicle license, same, outright expense. Delivery cost, of course, kung freight yan, etc., etc., you include it in the equipment. Painting and lettering, equipment. Ordinary repairs, outright expense. Water device to cool the equipment, well, again, kind of weird, di tayo familiar masyado, but it's part of, in order to make sure na may intended use. So, we include. So now, out of the 799,500, our value would be, our equipment is 515,500. So now, how do you journalize? Equipment of 515,500 and then yung different expenses. So prepaid insurance for the annual. So wag kalimutan, prepaid insurance. Taxes and licenses for the motor vehicle registration and repair expenses of 52,000, totaling to 799,000. So, to summarize, you have your land improvement, your building, and your equipment. And all of these are initially recognized at cost. Now, yung mga complications lang is that what if there's an old building in the land you bought? So, dalawa. May land kang binili, pero may nakatayong parang haunted house looking building, right? How do we account for that? So now we go to the PIC 2012 to 02, wherein, let's say, bumili ako ng land for 1 million. Yung 1 million na yon, it's the land in this building. The first question you will ask in order to properly classify it would be, usable ba yung building? If the building is no longer usable, we capitalize the land. Meaning, purchase price of 1 million, pinagiba mo kasi hindi mo na kailangan eh. 350,000. Yung scraps ng building na to, binenta mo for 50,000. Ang magiging classification mo for all of those trouble is 1.3 million. So, if it's no longer usable, ipapademolish mo and then ibebenta mo yung materials. So, we capitalize the land if it's not usable. So, purchase price plus yung demolition cost para tanggalin yung unusable building minus yung nabenta mong scraps will give you your land value. On the other hand, if the building is usable, hindi naman pala siya haunted house, parang maganda pa rin siyang building, 1 million, we look at the fair value of each. Meaning, what do you mean by fair value? Kung magkano siya binibenta. So let's say, the building, determine 3 million yung fair value ng building, 1 million yung fair value ng land. So, if you look at it as one unit, 100%, 75% is building, 25% is land. So, using that analogy, kung 25% lang yung land, the land will be valued at 25% of the lump sum price. So, 1 million times 25%, yung land mo will be 250. And then the 750 will go to the building. So, the question is, what if you intend to demolish the old building? So, usable old building, kahit na, so usable siya, pero dinemolish mo pa rin. The idea here is, it depends on how you will classify yung new building na itatayo mo. If it's for PPE investment property, meaning for either for your operations or for business use, you will recognize a loss. Pero kung inventory mo siya i-classify, meaning nagbebenta ka generally ng buildings, iba yung classification. So let's look at an example. Meron kang cost of the old building at 100,000. The construction cost of your new building is 900,000. To demolish the old, it will be 50,000 minus yung salvage value of 10,000. So, how using all of these for information, let's look at two scenarios. If yung new building mo, gusto mong i-classify as investment property or PPE, this is how you will do it. Yung construction cost, 900,000, plus yung demolition cost of 50,000, less the salvage cost, will give you your building of 940,000. And then yung cost of the old building, we will categorize as a loss. On the other hand, if you categorize mo as inventory, yung cost of the old building, i-add mo sa construction cost, the demolition cost, and then less salvage cost. And then i-add mo to the inventory. So simply, the question is, ang difference lang is, how do you value the cost of the old building? And the answer is, it depends on the classification of your new building. If your new building is PPE, the cost of the old building of 100,000 will be a loss. On the other hand, if you classify your PPE as inventory because nagbibenta ka usually ng mga buildings, you will now add that rather than hindi siya loss, ika-capitalize mo siya to inventory. So, if you want a more clear idea, just read through this slide, right? Ito lang naman yung rules. So we're finally done with the initial recognition of PPE. So that's the very first thing that I want you to master. Kailangan magaling kang mag-classify ng PPEs. The next step is to have our subsequent recognition. So, okay, we're happy. Na-classify natin properly into land improvement, building, equipment. But aside from land, everything or every PPE depreciates. So, how do we arrive at our net PPE? So, our net PPE would be our property, plant, and equipment, minus AC debt, minus AC impairment, accumulated impairment, plus capital expenditure. So, yung official definition nito is PPE, net PPE is carried at cost less accumulated depreciation less impairment. Right? So ano yung impairment? Impairment, similar to receivables, the PPE must not be carried at more than its recoverable amount, while ang depreciation naman is the allocation of depreciable amount because over the useful life in a systemic manner. But para hindi kayo malito, let's put impairment on the shelf muna. Generally, I want you to know lang that cost minus AC debt is equal to your net PPE. And this net PPE is what we call our carrying amount. Right? So carrying amount is our cost minus AC debt. So now, how do we depreciate properties? So how do we depreciate properties? Well, we will have three types. Straight line depreciation, which is very systematic. Declining balance, or what we call double or 150%, and units of activity. But before anything else, I just want you to have an appreciation of the overview of depreciation. How does depreciation work? Well, this is how it works. First is, PPE are classified as assets instead of outright expense, just because they will produce the benefit. So may cost ka. Let's say you bought this for 1,300,000. The next step is, we know na all PPE except land has a limited useful life. So basically, how much yung useful life, ang meaning niya is it's the estimate of the asset's expected product life in terms of either time, units, or activity. So pare, bumili ako ng kotse. There are different ways of looking at the useful life of a car. Either it could be in years, like okay, siguro roughly a car now, if I buy it, 5 years lang siya productive. So the 5 years is its useful life. Pwede rin naman, baka rather than time, it should be mileage. Like gaano mo karami ginagamit. So that would be units or activity, right? So basta, ang general rule is, may cost ka na initially, you will categorize as an asset because it will produce benefits. But yung benefits na yon will happen into what we call the useful life lang. So may limit siya. And let's say it's 4 years useful life. And the idea is, itong 1.3, we can then segment it into 4 years. 1 year, 2nd year, 3rd year, 4th year. So now, the last step is that at the end of its useful life, baka there's still some value. And that value is what we call our salvage or residual value. So basically, it's the estimate of asset disposal value. So it's the value at the end of its useful life. So meaning, after 4 years, meron ka pang residual value of 300. Mabibenta mo pa rin siya kahit tapos na yung useful life niya. Ang tawag dun sa 300 na yon is your salvage or your residual value. So now, kung alam natin na 300 is residual value, if 1,300 to, and then mabibenta mo siya ng 300 at the end of the year, ano pa yung remaining? May 1,000 ka pa. Na, this is what we call naman the depreciable amount. This is the portion of cost that we need to depreciate. So ano yung equation to get the depreciable amount? It's the cost of 1,300 minus the residual value of 300, which is basically what you can expect to sell at the end of its useful life. It will become your depreciable amount of 1 million. Ay, 1,000. Yung 1,000, we have to spread it or allocate it on per period. So kung 4 years, 1,000 divided by 4. So every year, we should recognize a depreciation of 250. So ano yung importante dito? Cost is your total cost of the asset. Useful life is the amount of life na you estimate na magiging productive pa yung asset na yon. At the end of its useful life, meron ka pang onting mabibenta. May residual value ka pa na pwedeng ibenta. So, ano lang yung pwede mong i-depreciate? Yung pwede mo lang i-depreciate is cost minus residual value equals your depreciable amount. So, to summarize, sa straight line depreciation, the first method of depreciating, in order for you to get your depreciation expense, it should be your depreciable amount divided by your useful life. This is your master formula for straight line depreciation. Again, for depreciation expense, it would be your depreciable amount divided by your useful life. So, if our depreciable amount is 1,000, divide mo by my useful life of 4 years, my depreciation expense should be 250 a year. So, anong itsura nito? This is a table, right? You have your cost, you have your depreciation expense, your accumulated depreciation, and your carrying amount. So, I want you to start using a table like this. So, in year 0, nung binili mo, at 1,300, ipe-present mo siya at equipment 1,300 minus ACDEP, wala pa naman, is equal to your carrying amount. Now, 1 year has expired. So, basically, yung cost niya will still remain the same. Equipment will always be valued at 1,300. Now, in year 1, nagkaroon ka ng depreciation of 250, right? So, yung accumulated depreciation mo, if the journal entries, debt expense 250, credit ACDEP 250, our ACDEP will be 250 din. Now, therefore, what would be our carrying amount? 1,050. Saan nanggaling yung 1,050? It's the 1,300 cost minus the ACDEP of 250 is equal to your carrying amount. Right? So, now, at the year 1, magiging 250 na to. Kasi nag-depreciate yung portion. And it will now be 1,050. Right? Next. After another year, meron ka na namang depreciation of 250. Now, the ACDEP is madadagdagan na naman ng another 250. So now, yung ACDEP mo coming in from year 1 was 250, nadagdagan pa ng isa pang 250. So 250 plus 250, it's now gonna be 500. So pataas ng pataas yung ACDEP. So now, the accumulated depreciation would be 500,000. So yung carrying amount mo after the year 2 would be 800. How did you solve that? It's the cost minus the ACDEP equals carrying amount. So in the financial statements, after the year 2, magiging 500 na yung accumulated depreciation, 800 na lang yung carrying amount. So year 3 same, so 250, yung ACDEP 500, nadagdagan na naman ng another 250, naging 750. So 550 na lang yung carrying amount. So yung year 3, 1,3 minus 750, nagiging 550. And then finally, year 4, the last year of depreciation, 1,000, so magiging 300. Ano yung napapansin nyo? If you do the table correctly, your ACDEP in the last year of your depreciation will be equal to your depreciable amount. And another thing is that yung carrying amount will be equal to your residual value. Right? So basically, that's how you can check. But that's how depreciation works. So from 1,3 na carrying amount, unti-unti nababawasan siya because tumataas na yung accumulated na depreciation. So, in terms of the way you can do it, to summarize, ganito ko gagawin. Step 1, I will get the cost of 1,300. So I'll get the cost of 1,300. I will then, next step ko is subtract my residual value of 300 so that I can get the depreciable amount. Now, the depreciable amount, I will now divide by my useful life. Here, my useful life. To get my annual depreciation in months. And then, basically, do the table. So, 1,3, 1,3. So, carrying amount 1,3. 1,3 minus 250 is 150. 150 minus 250 is 800. 800 minus 250 is 550. And 550 minus 250 is 300. Right? So that's another way. Right? So, ano yung nakikita nyo dito? In straight line method, the depreciation is always the same. And then at the end of the useful life, yung ACDEP mo will be equal to your DA and yung carrying amount mo will be equal to your residual value. Right? So, ganun lang ang straight line depreciation. Right? So, importante lang is that depreciation expense is equal to depreciable amount divided by useful life. Pero may magtatanong sa inyo, parang sir, hindi ba parang weird the same yung depreciation ni every year? Parang for me, ang opinion ko po is that pag mas bago, it would depreciate more in terms of its early years. So parang pare, yung phone ko, mas malulose yung value niya more in the first year. And then pag 3 years, 4 years, wala na masyadong difference yung loss in value. Mas paliit ng paliit yung pagka-loss niya in value. And that's why another method of depreciating is what we call our declining balance. So, some things to know muna. Definitions muna tayo. Declining balance, ang importante is for you to get your declining balance rate. And how you get that is N, depending on double declining or 1.5 to 150%, times 1 divided by our useful life. So, that's how you get your DBR or your declining balance rate. And then what we do is that we get our carrying amount, we multiply it by our DBR so that we can get our depreciation expense for that year. So, sounds weird, pero let's go through it one by one. So, how do we do it? If it's called double declining, the first step is N will be 2. So, the first step is we want to get our DBR. So, 2 times 1 over, ilan yung useful life? 4 years. So, 2 times 1 divided by 4 will give you what? It will give you a 50% DBR. Now, how do we do the depreciation in the table? Well, first step is may carrying amount ka when you purchase, right? So your end carrying amount is 1,300. In year 1, your carrying amount beginning will be 1,300 pa rin. Now you multiply your DBR to 1,300 to get my depreciation expense of 650,000. So dahil wala pa naman tayong ACDEP, first ACDEP pa lang, our ACDEP will be 650. Now, 650 minus 1,300 will be 650. Yung year 2, yung carrying amount ko now is 650. 650 times, so let's go to year 2. Year 2, 650 times the DBR, carrying amount times DBR. My depreciation expense now is 325. So, how do you do it? 325 plus 650. So, pag pinagsama mo, magiging 950. Right? 950. So, basically, how do you get your carrying amount at the end? It's 650 minus your depreciation expense equals 325. Right? And then finally, kung alam naman natin na the salvage value should be 300, yung carrying amount niya is 325, hindi na natin i-50%. I-force lang natin na from 325, paano siya magiging 300? It should decrease by 25 to get 1,000, right? So, basically, ganon yung theory behind DBR, right? So, to summarize, in declining double balance, we multiply our DBR to the cost without subtracting the residual value. So, we multiply the DBR to the cost or to the carrying amount. Next is we apply our DBR to the updated beginning carrying amount every year. So, the 1,300 times 50%, 650 times 50%. In the last period, we don't use the DBR to get the depreciation expense. Kasi kung 50% natin to, magiging 100 something yan. Which is more than, instead, we force that the depreciation to give us the carrying amount equals to the salvage value of 300. So, basically, that would be your declining balance. And then lastly, the third camp would argue na baka it shouldn't be measured in time. It should be measured in how much you use it. So it should be per usage. So the last depreciation that I need you to master would be units of activity. Wherein, the major goal naman here is that you want to get your depreciation expense per unit or your DPU. So your DPU will be your depreciable amount divided by, rather than useful life in time, it will be divided by units of activity. And then, every year, titingnan mo lang, ilang units of activity ba yung ginamit ko? I-multiply ko lang siya by DBU so that I can get my depreciation expense. So, how will this look? First is, okay, consistent tayo dito sa assumptions na to. Ang nag-iba is that the useful life is not in years but in 10,000 hours. Sinasabi niya that in terms of the depreciable amount, ang total nun is 10,000 hours. So, to get our DPU, we will now do our depreciable amount of 1,000. So, that's 1,000. How did you get 1,000? It's the cost of 1,300 minus residual value of 300. So, depreciable amount is 1,000. Divide mo rather than by time, by units of activity. So, 10,000 hours. It will give you your DPU of 0.10 per hour. So, ano mangyayari? In purchase date 1, okay, so wala pa namang depreciation. Let's go to year 2020. In 2020, let's say, 300 hours yung nagastos mo. So, 300 times 0.10 will give you a depreciation expense of 300. So, carrying amount current of 1,300 minus 300 na depreciation expense, 1,000 na lang yung carrying amount mo. Next, yung 1,000, next year, gumamit ka ng 2,000 hours, so your depreciation expense would be 2,000 times 0.10 is equal to 200. So now, my ACDEP would be 50. Right? So if ang beginning ko is 1,000, I subtract the depreciation expense of 200, it will give me 800. And then last year, 4,000 sa 2022. So 400 yung depreciation expense. So yung ACDEP mo will become 900 because that's 500 plus 400 is equal to 900. So if my carrying amount is 800 minus 400, so 400 na lang yung carrying amount. And then finally, 400 times minus 1,000 hours, 100, naging 3. So, napansin nyo na ito will total 10,000 hours. 10,000 hours. And then, yung ACDEP mo pa rin will still give you your depreciable amount and yung carrying amount. Right? So, that's units of activity. So, that's just basically an overview. If nagugulahan pa kayo, if you have a lot of questions, don't worry. Let's go through some exercises. Right? Let's master. Winston Printing purchased a new machine on October 1, 2020 at a cost of 120,000. The company estimated that the machine will have a residual value of 12,000. The machine is expected to be used for 12,000 working hours during its 4-year life. So, maraming binigyan na information, pero basically, ang gusto lang natin is, let's just master how do we depreciate using the 3 methods. So, let's start. Step 1 would be my straight line depreciation. The very first thing that I want to do would be what? To get my depreciable amount. 120 cost minus my residual value raw of 12,000 would be a depreciable amount of 108,000. Yung useful life ko is 4 years. So, ano lang yung pagkakaiba? May complication na tayo now because when did you buy the equipment? You bought it at the middle of the year. So, ano mangyayari? In the first year, 3 months lang of depreciation yung makukuha mo. And then sa last year, you will get 9 months. So, nabali. Technically, 4 years pa rin siya. 4 years siya. Pero bakit magtataka kayo? Bakit 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024? Sorry, this should be 2024. So, hindi ba yan 5 years? Ang nangyari is, full year to, full year depreciation. Pero in the first year na you purchased, 3 months worth lang siya. From October, November, December. And then sa last year, it's gonna be, sorry, mali yung araw. In the last year, it's gonna be 9 months. So 3 plus 9, 12. So 1 year, binasag lang natin in the first year and the last year. Okay? So wag malito. Ganun lang yung nangyari. So useful life niya is 4 years, pero dahil they bought it in the middle of the year, nabasag lang yung isang year. 3 months sa first year, 9 months dun sa last year. And then in the middle, straight line na 1,000. So what would it look like? So balik tayo. In straight line depreciation, the first thing that you want to get is your annual depreciation. Annual depreciation. And how you get that would be depreciable amount of 108,000. So itong 108 divided by the useful life in years of 4. So 108,000 divided by 4 will give you 27,000. 27,000. Ang sinasabi niya is that for 1 whole year, you will have 27,000 in terms of depreciation. Now, ano yung problem? In the first year, 3 months lang. So, do we expect na 27,000 depreciation expense? No. We expect a portion lang of 27,000. In fact, it's 3 months worth. October, November, December. So, 27,000. How did we get the 6,750? Well, what we did was, yung ginawa natin was, what? 27,000 represents your annual depreciation. So, ano yung monthly depreciation natin? So, 27,000 divided by 12, 2,250. 2,250, ilang months for year 1? 3. So, October, November, December. So, times 3, 6,750. Dahil first year, ang ACDEP natin 0 pa, so 6,750. Magiging 113,250. So, yung ending carrying amount of 2020, it's gonna be the beginning carrying amount of 2021. So, now, hindi na tayo kakabahan. 12 months yung 2021. So, copy lang, 27,000. So, 27 plus 6,750. So, 27,000 plus 6,750, our ACDEP will now be 33,750. So, now, carrying amount of 113,250 minus the depreciation expense will give you your carrying amount at the end. So now, the end of 2022 will be the beginning carrying amount of 2022. Sorry, the end of 2021 will be the beginning carrying amount of 2022. Again, full year, so 27,000. So 33,750 plus 27, 60,750. How do you get the carrying amount? First method is the carrying amount, net PPE minus the depreciation expense for the year. So 86,250 minus 27, that will be 59,250. Another way, para hindi kayo malito, is cost. So hindi carrying amount, yung cost. Minus ACDEP is equal to 5950. So there are two ways. So huwag kayong malito. So there are two ways to get 59,250. So just to illustrate to you, para lang clear. Ito yung gusto natin makuha, 59,250. Again, ulitin ko para clear. How do you get 59,250? The first method is you get the carrying amount. Meaning carrying amount, ito na yung parang PPE minus ACDEP mo, right? So kung ito 86,250 minus the depreciation expense, that's how you get 59,250. So 86,250 minus 27,000, 59,250. That's one way. What's the second way of getting 59,250? The second way is you get the cost. Itong cost at the start minus your ACDEP for after the year, it will still give you yung 59,250. So 120 minus 6750, 59,250. So there's two ways. So wag kayong malito. Pero I'm just using the other way para ma-appreciate niyo yung table. Finally, year 3. So ang carrying amount is 59,250 at the end of 2022. That's gonna be the beginning of 2023. And then full year ulit. So 27. So 600,750 plus 27, 87,750. So now, how do you get the carrying amount? 59,250 minus 27 will be 32,250. And then finally, in the last year, basag ulit. Hindi na siya hanggang December 2024. But what? It's gonna be until September na lang. January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September. 9 months. So September 2024. So, yung depreciation expense natin will now be what? 27,000. So again, is the annual depreciation, pero kailangan lang natin 9 months. So 27,000 annual depreciation divided by 12. My monthly depreciation is 2,250. Gusto ko makuha yung 9 months. So times 9, 20,250. Yun. And then my act debt will be 108,000, which is, why does 108,000 look similar? Because the 108,000 is your depreciable amount. And then 32,250 minus 2,250 will be 12,000. 12,000, why does it look similar? Because your carrying amount should be equal to your residual value. Right? So again, para color-coded, yung carrying amount mo at the end of your depreciation will be equal to your residual value. Right? And then yung depreciable amount mo of 108. Right? So, to show you na in theory, kapag straight line depreciation, pare-pareho lang naman talaga yung depreciation. Itong dalawang weird, the first year and the last year, when you add them together, what number will it give you? 6,750 represents 3 months of depreciation plus 9 months of depreciation of 2,250. 27,000. So as you can see, 4 na beses tayo nag-depreciate ng 27,000. Ang nangyari lang is that in the first year, dahil binili mo ng October, 3 months siya. And then, yung last year, dahil may butal, gagawin mo 9 months. So that is straight line depreciation. Now, let's go to declining balance. So now we go na to the second, which is declining balance, right? So for the double declining, how do we get our DBR? So that's the first thing that we want to do, right? So in terms of DBR, what we can do would be what? 2, because double declining, times 1 over the useful life, which is 4, will give us our DBR of 50%. So now, tatanungin niyo ako, sir, paano to? May nag-break na 3 months sa first year sa 2020 and sa 2024. Paano natin gagawin? Well, the first thing is, yung 50%, bakit siya naging 13% in year 2020? It's because we prorated it. Kung 50% yan, so let's just say 0.50, divide mo by 12, multiply mo by 3, so roughly it will give you 12.5% or 13%. 120 times 13% DBR will give you your depreciation expense of 15. So 15 yung act debt. Your carrying amount now is 105. Yung 105, basically regular programming times 50%. So 52,500. Act debt will be 15 plus 52,500. So 67,500. And your carrying amount is 105 minus 52,500 will be 52,500. And then 52,500 times 50%, 26,250. 26,250 plus the previous year's act debt of 67,500 will give you 93,750. So what's the other way to get a carrying amount? It's the cost of 120,000 minus 93,750. It's equal to 26,250. And then in 2023, you'll have 20,650 times 50%, so 13,125. How to get act debt? It's 93,750 plus 13,125, 106,875. So how do you get the carrying amount of 2023? Pwede, another method is carrying amount at the beginning of 26,250 minus depreciation expense for the year of 13,125 will be equal to 13,125. And then, oops, 13,125 seems very close already to our residual value of 12,000. So dahil it seems very close, we will now not apply DBR, but we will force the carrying amount to be equal to 12,000. So what should be our depreciation expense so that our carrying amount will become 12,000? Well, the answer to that will be what? 13,125 minus 12,000 equals 1,125. So our act debt will still be equal to our depreciable amount and our carrying amount will be 12,000. Finally, we'll have units of activity wherein ito naman, ang importante is we just get the depreciation expense per unit or DPU, and then we multiply it by the units of activity for the year. So step 1, instead of useful life in years, we use the per hour or the activity. So step 1 is depreciable amount of 108,000 divided by your useful life of 12 hours will give you our DPU of $9. Ang maganda sa units of activity, wala siyang pakialam kung mid-year yung purchase mo. Titingnan mo lang kung ilang hours. Right? So kung 1.7 times 9, 15,300 yung depreciation expense. 27 times 9, 24,300. 28 times 9, 25,200. 26 times 9, 23,400. And then 22 times 9, 90,800. Then as you can see, your act debt will still be 108 and 12,000. So we're just following the same formula that we've been doing. So now, we were able to solve and compute and calculate the depreciation table for each of the period. So, ano yung mga complications? First, you need to master your depreciation methods. Number 2, dapat hindi kayo kakabahan kung middle of the year binili. The third and final complication is, what if nag-iba yung company ng depreciation method? So, wag kakabahan. Kapag nag-iba sila ng depreciation method, all you have to do is follow these 2 simple steps. If there is a revision of periodic depreciation, all you have to do is determine the carrying amount plus the remaining useful life, determine the new depreciable amount, right? And then divide with that remaining useful life. So your depreciation now will be your new depreciable amount divided by your remaining useful life. So let's say, on January 1, 2020, Vasquez SA shows equipment at 32,000 and accumulated depreciation of 9,000. The depreciation was resulted from a straight line method with a useful life of 10 years and residual value of 2. The company concludes that the equipment has a useful life of 7 years instead of 10 years with the same residual value. Compute the revised annual depreciation. So, ang hinahanap is, ano raw ba yung carrying amount on December 31, 2025? So, step 1, let's determine first the carrying amount nung nag-iba yung assumption and the remaining useful life. So again, carrying amount is just cost minus act debt is equal to carrying amount. So 32,000, the cost, minus 9,000 act debt, our carrying amount is 23,000. The question is, but now, how many years has passed from the 10 years? Well, one way of looking at it would be what? Let's get naman the remaining useful life. The cost was 32,000. Right? Our residual value is 2,000. Therefore, our depreciable amount is 30,000. Now, my useful life before was 10. So my annual depreciation was 3,000 per year. 3,000 per year. What is my accumulated depreciation now? It's 9,000. Divide by the annual depreciation every year, 3,000. So, ilang years yung nagamit? 3. So, my remaining life was the revised useful life. So, instead of 10 years, 7, minus ilang years have passed already? 3. So, your remaining useful life is now 4 years. So, dati, may 7 years, so dati 10 minus 3 years use. So, kala niya dati may 7 years left ka pa. But sabi nila, mali pala, hindi pala 10 years yung useful life. 7 lang pala. So now, what we do is just, ano ba yung revised assumption mo of useful life, which is 7, minus the years used, which is 3. So remaining useful life would be 4 years. So now, we can now determine the new depreciable amount. 23,000, which is the carrying amount, minus 2,000, which is still the residual value, will give us a depreciable amount of 21,000. Our useful life now is in 4 years. So now our new annual depreciation would be 21,000 divided by 4 years equals 5,250. So now, it's January 2023. Why? Kasi January 2020, 2021, 2022. So 2023 na lang. So we have 3 years to go. So what will be the carrying amount on December 31? Well, we can just do, so I'll teach you a shortcut rather than the table, right? Let's get our act debt, right? So what does that mean? My annual depreciation is 5,250. Today is January 1, 2023. Alam ko na every year, it will have a depreciation expense of 5,250. So the question is, from now until December 31, 2025, ilang years? Well, January 1, 2023, 2024, 2025, 3 years. So 5,250 times 3 will be my accumulated depreciation of 15,750, representing the 3 years of 5,250 depreciation. And then now, my carrying amount in Jan 1 is 23,000 minus my act debt in after the 3 years is 15,750. So our carrying amount would be 7,250. That is the answer to that problems like these. So again, sometimes iba naman yung may iba. Sometimes companies would change estimates on residual values. So ito, ang naiba is, okay, same pa rin yung useful life, pero now yung residual value, mali pala. Instead of 2,000, 1,000 lang pala. So paano natin gagawin? 23 minus 1,000, so that's the carrying amount minus the new residual value, will have our depreciable amount of 22,000. Our remaining useful life, since 10 years and 3 years have passed, will be 7. So, depreciable amount of 22 with the new residual value, so 22, divided by 7, my annual depreciation is 3,142.86. Right? So, again, ganun lang yung gagawin. And then, lastly, for equipment, for mga additional expenditures on equipment, for theory lang, the question lang naman is, does it improve the operating efficiency and useful life of the equipment? If yes, we add that to the capital expenditure. So if it improves, we add to the PPE. But if it merely maintains, so kuwari, may cellphone ako, if it maintains the same functions, that is just an expense, ordinary repairs. Basically, ang gagawin lang natin is debit, repair maintenance expense, credit cash, or AP. Now, if it improves the function, parang it's 2 times faster, it's 3 times, etc., etc., that is a capital expenditure, which we add, right? So we add. So basically, that would be the end of depreciation, right? So last na lang is disposal. And honestly, sa disposal, all you have to do is update your depreciation at the time of disposal. So make sure na you depreciate for the fraction of the year. So pare, tapos ka na mag-depreciate ng end of 2024, binenta siya ng June, may 6 months ka pang depreciation. So the next thing you have to do is update the depreciation. Next step is determine gain and loss. So gain kapag yung disposable value is higher than the carrying amount, and then loss if the disposable value is less than carrying amount. So there are 3 scenarios lang naman. What happens to the PPE at the end of its life? 1, you retire it. 2, you sell it. 3, you exchange it for another equipment. So first, mag-retire muna tayo. So Matterhorn AG retires its delivery equipment which costs 44,000. Accumulated depreciation is also 44,000 on this delivery. No residual value is received. So basically, this is just gonna be debit, ACDEP, credit PPE, 44,000. Another scenario, if it's partially depreciated, para yung ACDEP is 37, it will look like ACDEP 37,000, credit PPE of 44,000. So dinirecognize mo na yung PPE. And then you'll have a loss on retirement of 6,000. So step 1, para hindi kayo malito kung gain or loss sa retirement, would be what? Ang una nyo muna i-credit is PPE at cost, 44,000. And then you debit or reverse na your ACDEP at 37. Kailangan magbalanse. So kung debit, it's like an expense, so loss on retirement. Kung credit, it should be gain. So again, gain or loss. So let's go naman to the sale. So ang gusto ko lang pansinin nyo is that yung gain on disposal is credit, the loss on disposal is debit. You will always credit the PPE at its cost, and then you will always debit the updated accumulated depreciation. So mag-iiba lang is yung gain or loss. Yung cash is how much you receive. So net, ang gusto ko lang sabihin is that if you were able to sell your equipment more than its carrying amount, that's a gain on disposal. If you were only able to sell it less than your carrying amount, it's a loss, right? But let's just take a look at an example para mas madali. So let's say, meron ka raw company that sells equipment on September 30, 2020 for 20,000 in cash. The equipment originally cost 72,000 as of January 1 and has an accumulated depreciation of 42,000. The annual depreciation for the equipment is 6,400. Prepare the journal entries to record the sale. So, first thing na I want you to notice is that yung carrying amount, so the equipment originally cost 72, right? Another thing is yung ACDEP is only as of January 1, 2020. So, kailangan pa natin i-update to what? To September 30. So, we need to find the depreciation for how many months? January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September. 9 months. So, if I know that my annual equipment depreciation expense is 6,400, all I have to do is 6,400 times 9 over 12 is 4,800. So to update my depreciation, it would be debit depreciation expense of 4,800, credit ACDEP of 4,800. So now, my total ACDEP would be what? My total ACDEP would be 4,800 plus 42, right? So next step, when you recognize your compound journal entry, the first thing that you do is credit your PPE at original cost. So step 1. So always follow the order. So 72,000. 72,000. Second is debit the cash proceeds. Magkano yung nabenta? 20,000. What's your ACDEP now? Your ACDEP now would be 42 plus 4,800. So 46,800. All you have to do is squeeze the amount. May kulang na debit. So 5,200. So now we know that it's a loss. Ganun lang naman. So example, binenta niya 28. So again, we update the depreciation for 9 months. So 48. What's the process? credit PPE at original cost, debit cash of 28, debit ACDEP of 46,800. Ano yung kulang? 2,800 on the credit side. So now, it will be a gain kasi credit. So, ganun lang. And then finally, for disposal, the last step is pag-exchange. So, you get the cost of the new PPE. So, the cost is fair value of old PPE plus cash paid. And then determine the gain or loss. So, gain if the fair value of the old PPE is more than the carrying amount, or loss if the fair value of the old PPE is less than the carrying amount. So, please take note of this slide. It's better to look at it in the lens of an example. So, Cordero Shipping exchanges old delivery equipment for new delivery equipment. So, nag-exchange lang sila. The book value of the old delivery equipment is 33,000. So, 61,000 less cumulative depreciation of 28. Its fair value is 19,000 and a cash of 5,000 is paid. Prepare the entry to record the exchange. So, paano yan? First is, let's determine the cost of the new PPE. The cost of the new PPE is fair value of the old, 19,000, plus the cash proceed of 5. So, the cost of the new PPE is 24,000. And then, we just make this compound journal entry. So, number 1 is debit the new PPE cost. So, the new equipment is 24,000. Second is credit the cash proceed of 5,000. Credit the old PPE at cost. So, yung old equipment natin is 61,000 less the ACDEP of 28. So, now, the last step na lang is, what is the gain or loss? Sino yung mas malaki? Mas malaki si credit of 66,000. Ano yung kulang? 14,000. Dahil debit, it's a loss on disposal. Oh, another example. The value naman is 37,200. So, 37,200 plus the cash proceed of 5,000. So, the cost of your new PPE will be now 42,200. So, your new equipment will be now, so ano yung compound journal entry? First is debit the new PPE cost at 42,200. Credit the cash proceed next. Credit the old PPE at cost. So, 61. And then, debit the ACDEP. So, ano yung kulang? Mas malaki na to by 4,200. So, dahil credit, it's gonna be a gain on disposal. So, finally, the last step is we're done. We're done with the initial measurement, the subsequent measurement, and the disposal. So, ano yung final for equipment? Basically, yung financial statement. So, nakikita nyo, it's just net PPE in our financial statements. So, that officially ends the first part. We're done now with PPE. Lahat yon concepts. Ano lang mahirap? Depreciation and mga disposals, right? So, please review your depreciation well. So, now, we can now go to part 2.